President Trump, who repeatedly ran on a promise to defend the Second Amendment, said today that Alex Preddy should not have been carrying a gun when he was killed by federal agents.
I don't like that he had a gun. I don't like that he had two fully loaded magazines. That's a lot of bad stuff. And despite that, I say that's a very unfortunate.
Now, many people have compared that comment today and in the last few days to what happened and what the president said when Kyle Rittenhouse not only brought a gun to that protest in Kenosha, Wisconsin, but also used it to kill two people and wound another, and what a jury later determined was self-defense.
That was an interesting situation. You saw the same tape as I saw, and he was trying to get away from them, I guess, it looks like, and he fell, and then they very violently attacked him. And it was something that we're looking at right now, and it's under investigation. But I guess he was in very big trouble. He would have been, he probably would have been killed.
My next source was the acting Secretary of Homeland Security when those protests were happening in Kenosha. He is also the Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer at the America First Policy Institute. Chad Wolf is back here on the show. And thank you, Chad, for being here. When you hear the president's comments today, how is that consistent with the Second Amendment?
Well, Caitlin, thanks for having me. The comments that I heard the president make clearly is in reference to an individual coming and interfering with a law enforcement operation. I think that's a very different thing than just showing up perhaps to a protest and having a concealed carry firearm with you. But once you inject yourself into a law enforcement operation, then the dynamics and the situation changes completely.
But does that mean that you think what those agents did was the right move that day?
No, I'm not saying it's justified. I'm going to let the investigation play out. But I will tell you, though, having obviously been at the department and having been overseeing a lot of, or not a lot of, but several officer-involved shootings, anytime an individual, again, interferes and inserts themselves in a law enforcement operation in a very chaotic environment, I might add, those law enforcement officers don't know that an individual may have a concealed carry. They don't know a lot of different things that we now know after the fact that we've had days to analyze. And so it's very chaotic, and I would say it's okay, obviously, if you're going to stand on the sidelines and protest and yell at ICE and call them all sorts of names. But once you start to interfere with officers and engage officers, that's a very different dynamic. And I think at least how I interpreted the president's comments, and certainly what I would be concerned with, would be that. And I know those law enforcement officers are also concerned with anyone that interferes and has a weapon as they're interfering with their operations.
But I mean, you watch those videos, as a lot of people have. On the videos we've seen, Alex Preddy does not brandish that weapon or unholster it while he is there interacting with officers. I mean, he has one hand up at one point and he's holding his phone with his other hand.
I have seen the videos, and I will be the first to tell you that, 3 camera videos don't tell you the whole picture. I think eyewitness testimony, I think understanding the commands that were given to Alex, what he may have said in return, I think all of this really matters. So before we draw any conclusions, to understand, did he tell the officers that he was carrying a firearm, which everyone that has a concealed carry knows that that's exactly what you're supposed to do, and other things. So again, I'm going to let the investigation unfold. All I can tell you is that anytime anyone, whether you have a weapon or not, if you interfere with a law enforcement operation, those officers in a very chaotic situation have seconds to make decisions. And I would say, there's little reason to do that. Somehow we've gotten to the point where everyday citizens think it's okay to interfere with law enforcement. You don't do that with an FBI operation. You don't do that with a DEA operation. You shouldn't do it with an ICE operation.
Well, I mean, obviously what we've heard from the eyewitnesses on the ground is they were there protesting and recording those agents that day. I mean, one of the witnesses, you talked about eyewitnesses as this investigation goes on, who recorded that interaction that we've seen. She just told Anderson Cooper that the federal government has not reached out to her. I mean, is that standard protocol based on what you know from when you ran the Department of Homeland Security, that they haven't reached out to her yet?
Well, again, I don't know where they're at in the investigation. Obviously, I'm not at the department. I don't have access to any of that information.
I mean, it's been 3 days.
Most of the times these investigations yeah. I mean, they obviously do drag out. Again, I don't know if she's known to them, if she's made herself known to them. There's a lot of unknowns there. But yeah, I mean, they should be collecting all of the eyewitness testimony, camera video, and everything else that is possible at that scene at that time, and then going out and doing those investigations as well. So absolutely, she, you know, again, if she's made herself known, perhaps they will get to her. Again, I don't know, but I'm sure that this will be a very lengthy investigation, and probably a very comprehensive one.
Would you have called Alex Preddy a domestic terrorist if you were running the Department of Homeland Security on Saturday?
Again, just knowing what I know, having served at the department, having been involved in officer-involved incidents as well as shootings, I know that there's a lot that has to play out. So my first instinct would not be to characterize what the motive or motives of a potential suspect was or wasn't. I would let the investigation play out, try to understand what was going on, talk to the officers. A lot of times the information that you get firsthand, or that you get maybe minutes or hours after an incident like this, changes once it's been verified or it's been checked, or a variety of things could happen. So I think it's very important that you let that investigation unfold. I know President Trump has said that, as well as others. So I would do it, I would certainly do it that way, and then make comments based off of the facts and the findings of that investigation.
I mean, just given that they have produced nothing to back up these claims that he was a domestic terrorist, do you believe that Secretary Noem should apologize to the Preddy family?
Well, I'll let Secretary Noem speak for herself on that. Again,
yeah, but
I don't
I'm asking
have all the
you to speak
information
for
that they
yourself on
have.
that.
So,
what do you think?
yeah, again, I would not have made that comment. I've been very clear about that. I would let the investigation unfold and see where it goes from there. So my best advice, and not that they've asked, but my best advice is again, to let that investigation play out at this point. Comments that whether the Secretary have made or others have made on both sides, and again, Mayor Frey and Governor Walz have made some outrageous statements as well. Some of these statements on either side could be true at the end of this investigation. We just don't know yet. And so again, I know I sound like a broken record, but it's very clear in a law enforcement investigation like this that you don't make statements that you don't have the facts to. And so I, again, would let that investigation play out.
Sure, and you can criticize a Democrat for making a comment that they made, but Secretary Noem runs the Department of Homeland Security. It was agents who work at the Department of Homeland Security who shot and killed Alex Preddy that day. So her statements obviously carry a lot more weight when she comes out on Saturday and says he intended to do mass harm and calls him a domestic terrorist. Don't you agree?
Well, I don't disagree with you that she runs the department. What I would also say, though, is that the mayor's comments and the governor's comments about DHS not being a law enforcement agency and all the other terrible things that they have said, I think encourages a lot of people to do what I was just talking about earlier, which is to interfere in the law enforcement operations and put themselves in a very dangerous place. So I think it's right to obviously call out some of the outrageous statements that they have made as well. But again, I'm happy to answer this for a third time. My preference would be to let the investigation unfold before definitive statements are made.
Chad Wolf, thank you for joining us tonight. Appreciate your time.